Well, good afternoon, everyone. So good to be with the good people of North Carolina. I have spent significant time in my political career in North Carolina, up and across the state of North Carolina, trying to do what we're trying to do in many places around the country, and that's turn North Carolina blue. For those of you I have not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Antoine C. Wright. I hail from God's country, South Carolina, but I bring you greetings from Orlando, Florida, because I am at the 51st quadrennial session of the African Methodist Episcopal Church General Sessions, where on Saturday we will elect 4 new bishops to the AME Church, but I could not pass up the opportunity. Anytime Shante asks me to do anything and anything I can do to help my political father's Jim Clyburn's brother, G.K. Butterfield, make his state what it deserves to be. And so I'm so honored to be here. During the course of the 2020 campaign, we did several sessions in North Carolina around this idea of African American men being engaged, being involved. Sometime during the 2020 primary election, I wrote an op-ed piece for the New Yorker publication, and I caught a lot of hell because one of the lines in that op-ed piece, I said that Black men are the most consequential voting bloc in this nation, the most consequential voting bloc in this nation. And if we're not careful as Democrats, we're going to slip even further in terms of garnering their support around our issues and at the ballot box for our elections. Well, in 2016, you had 13% of Black men voted for Donald Trump, which is what sparked me to write that article. I went to Tom Perez, who's the chair of the DNC. I said, we have to do something about this, Mr. Chairman. And so he responded and did. And we developed this concept, which we took all across the country, called Chop It Up. We've implemented Chop It Up all across the country. We visited places virtually during the pandemic because we were limited to high tech and not high touch. And now here we are post the 2020 election, where we did elect a new president and we did have historical African American turnout. But unfortunately, we did see an increase in the uptick among African American men who again voted for Donald Trump and the Republican ticket. And so where I'm from in rural South Carolina, we don't talk about problems, we figure out how to implement solutions. And so here tonight, you will hear from some of the most important voices that North Carolina can bring to the table so that Black men in the Democratic Party are no longer on the menu. Without further ado, I will then do my part and moderate the show tonight. And so the next thing I'm supposed to do is turn it over to Representative Zach Hawkins, who will give us a little program purpose, a little program history. Representative, so good to see you again, and thank you for all you're doing in the state of North Carolina.
Absolutely. Well, Antoine, hopefully everyone can see and hear me. I think that one of the things that is really, really important for the people that are here tonight is to make sure that they understand that men of color are as you mentioned, one of the most important blocks for the Democratic Party. And so as I had the opportunity to take part in the Chop It Up and Shop Talk series during the 2020 campaign, we wanted to keep that going here in North Carolina. Because again, if we don't increase those numbers for men of color, we're going to see detrimental effects, not only at the local level, the state house and Senate level, but also statewide in North Carolina. We have to turn North Carolina blue. You talked about the numbers that we have, and so Asian American, African American, Latinx, you name it. All of those need to ensure that they're on top of learning what's going on in our state, and we have to engage them in authentic ways. And so that's what tonight is about. And you're going to hear from some rock stars across North Carolina. And a lot of these are my friends and brothers. We just want to chop it up. We just want to talk about, how men of color can be engaged totally in our process, to hear from people that they can relate to, and they can tell us what they think and what we need to be doing to get their vote and to get them more involved as we move forward. So thank you, Antoine, for being here and hosting this for us.
Absolutely. Senator McKissick and Commissioner Hughes, would love to hear from you. And let me welcome everyone who's participating with us. We oftentimes say, at least I heard it growing up in the AME church, it takes a village to raise a child, but we do know it takes a village to win elections. And all of you who have decided to join this call are critical components to the village we know as North Carolina Democrats. And so let me thank you. Senator, I'll turn it over to you.
Sure. Let me thank you, Anton, and thank you, Representative Hawkins. I think you guys have really epitomized and stated what this is all about, what we're trying to do. The important thing is that we become engaged and we get people engaged on an ongoing basis. We don't wait to 60 days before the election. We don't wait to 90 days before the election. We don't wait to calling in or making appearances in churches or civic organizations. We want to make certain that people become engaged on an ongoing basis and not just getting out there politically engaged when it comes to the national election cycles every 4 years, because the local election cycles are just as important, whether you're talking about for the County Board of Education or county commissioners or whether you're talking about city council, whether you're talking about the legislative races are absolutely critical and impact people in so many ways that sometimes they don't even understand and appreciate. So we want people engaged 24/7. And if we start this process now, if we get it going now, if we build that network, we build that capacity to deliver, we build the communication that's out there, the political infrastructure that is so critical, we'll be ready when 4 years comes. But more importantly, we're going to be ready each and every election cycle, and we're going to build, increase that capacity each and every year that we can. So I thank each and every one of you that are part of this call tonight. I look forward to participating in this program. And I think that we can make a fundamental, substantive difference. It's up to us. If we fail, it falls upon us too. I'm sure we can be successful at this. I'm committed to it. And I know each and every one of the people that are part of this tonight share that enthusiasm and excitement. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Commissioner Hughes, we'd love to hear from you, sir.
Well, thank you so much. And thank you everyone for being here. And I'm going to keep what I say very simple, which is I believe that this series that we're kicking off today is going to be about talking about the intersectionality of race, gender, and socioeconomic status, and so many other things that can come to define people of color. But also it's the fact that, people of color, whether you're Asian, Latino, or African-American, have historically been the base of this party and have historically shown up for our candidates and often feel like we're not doing enough as Democrats once we get into office. And I know folks like Congressman Butterfield and Congressman Clyburn don't let the Biden administration off the hook, understanding that President Biden's in the White House, not just in the primary, but in the general election, because of the work that people of color did in this last election when other constituencies were on the fence or did not show up or did not put in as much work as others of us did. And the reason is because we know that votes mean people's lives depend on it. And so I'm excited to kick off this event and kick off this series to hear from people, to know that we don't just want their votes, we want their ideas, we want their voices, and seats at the table for these folks. And all of us, all the people on this panel belong to the greater constituency of people of color. And we got to show up if we're going to not just win elections, but have good policy changes. And I think it goes without saying, and this is not a criticism, that one reason some folks gave Donald Trump a chance is they didn't see enough happen during the Obama administration. And that's not a criticism, that's their lived experience. And so we've got to make sure that we're walking the walk and talking the talk, because for a lot of people, these elections are life and death. They're not a popularity contest. They're not, any sort of a game. These are very real things that we have to show up for and participate in. So I'm excited to kick it off, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Jim, this past weekend, the Majority Whip had dinner with my family for the 4th of July. I told him I was doing this event. I told him Congressman Butterfield was going to be a part of it. And he said this, and I'll never forget this the rest of my life. He said, when you're in battle, if you want to compete, you call a friend. But if you want to fight and you want to win, you call G.K. Butterfield.
Antoine, thank you so
You want
very
to compete,
much.
you call a friend. But if you want to fight and you want to win, you call GK Butterfield. So I always want a fighter, and I definitely want to win. So, Mr. Whip, I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, Antoine. Can you hear me?
I can hear you just fine. In fact, I can see you too. So we're doing all right.
Okay, I've got this headset on tonight, so I just wanted to make sure that I'm being heard. Let me say good evening to all of you and thank you so very much for allowing me to join you this evening. It is such an illustrious group of men who are on this call, and just thank you, each of you, for your leadership and all the work that you do. But most importantly, we thank all of the participants who have come on this evening to have this conversation with us. The North Carolina Democratic Party is right on message. What you're doing here in North Carolina is taking place all across the country. We are getting ready now for 2022. The political season is upon us, and now we must start the work. Your vote is your power. I have said that for years, and I begin the conversation tonight by repeating it. Your vote is your power. Why do you think the Republicans have worked so hard to chip away at our right to vote? You know, the answer is very clear. When we vote, good candidates win. Good legislation is passed. When we fail to vote in significant numbers, bad things happen. Exhibit A, Donald Trump. And so, my friends, as we prepare for 2022, we must create a plan to guarantee a 100% turnout in this election. Many of you on this call have worked with me through the years, and I've worked with you, and you know that we say all the time, 99% will not do. We must have a plan in place. We need to start right now to make sure that we have a 100% turnout. The Republican machine is working. They're working right now. They have been known to be thinking when we are asleep. And so we are awake, and we're going to stay awake. For years, the Republican playbook was about disenfranchising. I've been reading several books over the last few days on the subject. I'm a student of history, and I know that the playbook over the years has been to disenfranchise African-American voters. And that's still the playbook, but it's not the entire playbook now. The playbook now is to wreak havoc on any group that may align itself with the Democratic Party. That includes not just African-American voters, but all voters of color, whether it's AAPI or Latinx or any other voter of color. They are trying to do everything within their power to make sure that voters of color do not participate in the election. Young voters are at risk, and senior citizens and LGBTQ and so many more. And now they're beginning to play with redistricting. And I know that Zach Hawkins is going to talk about redistricting in just a few minutes. And so I won't get very deep into the subject, but I just want you to know that redistricting is a big deal. Every 10 years, the state legislature is required to redraw the lines for Congress, redraw the lines for the state legislature. And the party in power has the ability to draw the lines the way they want to draw the lines. And so we are bracing ourselves for a big fight. We are being told that the census data is going to be delivered in late September, maybe the middle of October. And our legislative friends can set the record straight on that, but we will be getting the census data very soon. Once that data is in hand, that's when the Republican legislature will begin drawing the districts. And we are ready for warfare. We are ready to push back and to fight to make sure that we get our fair share of districts. And you know what's at stake? The United States Senate is at stake. Right now, we have a 50-50 Senate, 50 Democrats, 50 Republicans. It's an evenly divided United States Senate. And right now, there are 4 states in the country that are considered swing states in the next Senate election: North Carolina, Georgia, Florida, Arizona. These 4 states are in play. And so we need to make sure that we get a large turnout to make sure that we win the Richard Burr seat and we can elect a Democrat and send a Democrat to the United States Senate. We have 5 Democratic House members in North Carolina, 8 Republican House members. Because we are picking up a new seat now, it will be a 14th seat. So the question then becomes, will it continue to be a 5 Democratic member delegation, or whether we will be able to pick up one more and make it 6, or whether we will lose one and go back to 4. It's in the hands of the Republican legislature, and we've got to make sure that we get out and vote and make sure that we have our voices heard. Finally, let me say to you in closing that we must educate our voters. That's what we must do. That's my responsibility. That's your responsibility. We must educate our voters, and we must start now. We have national efforts that are afoot right now, right here in North Carolina. I know the AME conference is taking place in Orlando right now. They are also talking about efforts, not just in Florida, but all throughout the country to find ways of better educating our voters. But we need those of you on this call, those of you on the ground who are working every day and going to church and going to work and living in the community. We need you to educate our friends and our allies. In 2022, we must turn out the vote. We are going to use every technology that we have available, but technology will not get the job done. We need each of you working every day to get people registered to vote and to get ready to turn out the vote on election day. So thank you for joining us this evening. I look forward to a very productive conversation.
Thank you, Congressman. Thank you for your leadership. And certainly the one part you left out, what's at stake is you having the majority. It's certainly at stake in 2022. And so we need to keep your handsome face in the majority, or I think we all will suffer, not just in North Carolina. Elections are about coalitions and constituencies. And in the Democratic brand, there are so many coalitions and constituencies we need to win. The AAPI vote is a critical constituency we must have in order to win elections. And we're going to hear from Senator Muhammad, who is going to give us some background color on why AAPI men are so important to our coalition building.
Yeah, Antoine, thank you so much for the introduction. It's great to be here with everyone. Congressman Butterfield, it's an honor to be here as well. Go Eagles. I want to thank Representative Hawkins. Great to be here with Senator Floyd McKissick from Durham as well, and so many of my great friends from the legislature. And it's great to be with all those folks out there listening today. Look, you're absolutely right, Antoine. I think what we have to realize is that no matter what corner of the world we come from, whether you're Black, brown, Asian, no matter the color of your skin, how funny your name might sound, or whatever corner of the world you come from, at the end of the day, we all want the same things. We want good jobs, right? Good access to healthcare, housing, some sort of basic stability. And now also at the end of the day, I will tell you, especially during COVID-19, the Asian American community has been hit hard, especially some of the rhetoric that we heard out of Washington, D.C. We already knew Islamophobia was very alive and well in our country after we saw the 3 young Muslim Americans killed in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, execution style in their very own home. So we knew folks weren't safe then, but I think the Asian American community, not just across places like Charlotte or Raleigh, across North Carolina, across the country, is really waking up and realizing that we have to begin to also not only look out for ourselves or our family or community, but also really look out for those that may not look like us, but have the same needs as us. And as a proud Asian American, as one of 2 serving in the North Carolina Senate, along with my good friend, Senator Jay Children from Wake County, Antoine, I'll tell you, we look at the civil rights movement, right, as other groups of color, as other coalitions, and we look at how many roadblocks and setbacks and closed doors and fierce opposition so many of our leaders in the civil rights movement faced. I mean, Senator McKissick's father is here. Some other folks here are here to testify to that. And we can look back at that, and I mean, the playbook's there to be able to build those coalitions, to organize, and remind yourself that none of the biggest steps forward in our country, like the abolishment of slavery or voting rights for men and for Black men and women and desegregation of our schools, none of this stuff happened overnight. It took years of organizing and mobilizing, and absolutely most importantly, coalition building. So whether it's quality public education, I think Asian Americans, my fellow African Americans, or no matter what your background is, everyone in North Carolina cares about quality education. We've got over 1 million people still uninsured in our state. The critical importance of expanding access to Medicaid, absolutely critical. Access to capital, creating generational wealth. Our parents as immigrants, they came from foreign lands to make opportunity for themselves and their children. And we continue to see the backlash. Even some of our Latinx families are happening in the North Carolina General Assembly here. We're trying to deputize our sheriffs and targeting Black sheriffs because in 2018, we made some changes. And that's unfortunate. So we've got to be able to create a much more welcoming state and country. And I'm hoping in 2022, we absolutely have to do that. Because look, it's great to be here with fellow Democrats. But I will say at the end of the day, we're all Americans and we want what's best for this country and our state, and everyone deserves a chance at economic justice, quality education, access to healthcare, environmental justice, and of course, genuine justice reforms to finally give more folks in North Carolina second opportunities, second chances, instead of more and more oppression. So I'm honored and it's a joy to be here with each and every one of you. It's been a pleasure to work with so many of you fellow amazing men of color, whether it's learning from you or whether it's working side by side with you to make sure that we're advancing critical legislation that impacts all of us. So thank you so much for having me, and let's continue to work together because our lives literally depend on it. Thank you.
The Latino vote and the Native American vote certainly are such other key components to our success as Democrats. I know Representative Ricky and Representative Charles are on. If you guys, for the sake of time, because we're running a little bit behind and Shantae is poking me in my back, if you guys can give the Sunday school version of a quick flirtation with the importance of those constituencies, that would be helpful. I know we have you allocated for a minute, but if you can do 30 seconds, I promise you the Lord will bless.
Then you want to skip to John Verdejo.
I'm going to move our program further along because that's what I'm told to do. And I'm going to turn to John, who's going to talk about Black and Brown People Coalition building. As I mentioned, coalition and constituencies win elections. We've seen it done in 2008. We did it again in 2012. Thanks to G.K. Butterfield and others, we were able to save the country and the world to get a majority in 2018. We were able to do something fantastic in 2020, but we have to transfer all of that which we've learned and look at where we had to make up some ground in 2022 if we want to be successful. So I'll turn it over to you, John.
Antoine, it's good seeing you again. All my brothers, it was good seeing you. It's good seeing everyone. Yeah, no, it's not to beat this over the head or repeat what everyone said. It's important. As a Black Latino individual, father of 2 young boys, okay, I'm gonna take off my DNC hat for a moment, my political hat for a moment.
I want you to take off your hat, but I want you to use the Sunday school version because I don't want to get in trouble for time.
Well, is this? I think with us, we just need to feel our worth as men of color. We just need to make people feel our worth, and I mean by that is this. Many of us go to work, we're entrepreneurs, captains of industries, fathers, educators, so forth. And yes, many of us understand the importance of the vote, redistricting, so on and so forth. But it's more than that. I mean, it's like everyone has been saying, right? Where you can't just come to us 2 months prior to an election and say, hey, listen, you guys need to vote. We need to be worked just like everybody else. In the meantime, we're just trying to provide for our kids, trying to provide for our households. Yeah, and still, some of the policies that sometimes comes out don't necessarily pertain to us. So for a matter of time, really, it just, I'm just gonna repeat what everyone has said is that, it's so very much important that, we just get out to vote. We do this for our families, do this for our kids, we do this for the ones that we love, because it's not even about us anymore. It's not even about us, it's about those who as men, we have families who are responsible for. So, that's really in a nutshell. I know my time is limited, but it's good to see you all. Thank you all. Antoine, back to you.
Thank you. Let me also acknowledge Representative Terry Brown, who's on the call, Representative James is on the call, Representative Abraham Jones on the call, Representative Raymond Smith, the Vice Chair of the Hope County Board of Elections, Alan Thomas, is on the call, and the North Carolina Political Director, Aaron Thomas, is on the call. Let me acknowledge you and thank you for your service and thank you for the work you are doing, because North Carolina, again, will, I think, decide where this country is headed. Either we're going to go forward or we're going to go full steam backwards. And you all, the work you're doing is so important. At this point, I'm going to ask any friends who may be joining this call by way of the press, if you don't mind, please, ma'am, please, sir, if you would, at this point, exit the conversation. One of the unique things about Chop It Up and what makes Chop It Up so successful is that we have raw, authentic conversations. And I don't want anyone on this Zoom call to feel like they cannot be authentic because we have some friends on the press. And let me also say for the record, leaving this call doesn't mean putting the screen on mute or not showing us your picture. We actually need you to leave this call because we want to have some raw, authentic conversations so that we can be better. And so when we're better, we can have more to report to you. So I'll give the press a few minutes to govern themselves accordingly, and then we'll hop right to it. And again, thank all of you participants who are on these panels, and thank everyone who decided to join this call. I personally appreciate it, because so goes North Carolina, so goes the nation in 2022. At this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Senator McKissick, who's going to talk about voter suppression laws. I won't even say voter ID, voter suppression laws that have been used for a very long time to suffocate and strain the votes of people of color, in particular men of color. Senator, back to you, and I think you have 45 seconds to get everything you can in.
Well, what I'm going to do is this. I'm going to touch more on what Congressman Butterfield touched upon, the redistricting, because that's around the corner and that's something we need to be thinking about. When that redistricting process takes place, they're going to draw the legislative districts, they're going to draw the congressional districts. And one of the things that they've done in the past is use race as a factor in drawing these districts. When they use race as a factor, those districts were challenged. The congressional districts, the legislative districts were challenged, and we won. But it took years going through the court to win, because they were racially discriminatory. We also had cases in North Carolina dealing with whether they were partisan gerrymandering. And those particular cases we won through our state Supreme Court. I can suspect that we can anticipate that there will be more litigation that will be forthcoming as a result of redistricting. As Congressman Butterfield said, that data will be coming forth to us, the census data around probably around the end of September or early October. And there will be committees that will then begin to draw the maps. It's important for us to be absolutely engaged, absolutely involved in that process, the maximum extent possible. I'm sure the members of the General Assembly will be active, engaged in doing so. I know when I was back in 2010, we had $50,000 available as to use consultants to help do so. So to treat it short and simple, it's critical, it's important, it determines the mix of that General Assembly and the members of Congress. So we need to keep that in the forefront of our minds.
Representative Hawkins, you have any follow-up to that in terms of redistricting?
No, they covered it. I'm a member of the redistricting committee, and look forward to making sure that we're a part of not only listening to the people and making sure that we have free and fair elections, by making sure that Republicans don't gerrymander as much as possible, because we know they're going to try to. But it's really about making sure that the people that are on this call with me tonight are also helping to advise and watch closely, because if you don't watch, we can end up with anybody remembers the old 12th district that stretched literally from Charlotte to almost Winston-Salem. And so they don't want us to have the opportunity to have equal access. And so I don't want to add too much, but look forward to being a part of that process when it comes.
Now, I was told I gave Aaron Thomas, the Deputy Political Director, a promotion. So let me take back that promotion. He is the Deputy Political Director. The Political Director is Lorenzo Pedro, who I'm not sure if on this call, but he may be watching. So Lorenzo, please don't punish me when I come to North Carolina for giving Aaron a part-time promotion here tonight. I know we have the restoration of rights conversation that needs to take place, and we're going to give a minute to Senator Muhammad to touch on that if he doesn't mind.
Sure, Antoine, real quick. So what I will tell you is what related to voting rights, restoration rights, whatever you want to call it. It'd be great if we could pass the For the People Act in Washington, D.C. Honestly, that's our only saving grace, because there's state legislatures across the country where they're passing hundreds of bills focused on voter suppression. And North Carolina is no different. We recently had Senate Bill 326, which essentially gets rid of mail-in ballots, where you can mail in your ballot up to 3 days after Election Day. Well, now they want to reduce that down to 7:30 p.m. on Election Day, where your ballot must be turned in. And for years, decades, we've been having mail-in ballots, and they've worked perfectly fine. But you've heard this Trump's big lie, and the Republicans are peddling across the country. And that's the thing, whether it's continuing restricting folks' voting rights for folks that are previously justice involved, whether it's figuring out to push voter ID down our throats, essentially to silence our voices, or cutting election and polling sites. There is a pattern and practice of voter suppression, and it's veiled in some sort of election integrity. And the thing is, I always tell my Republican friends, if you genuinely cared about elections and voter integrity, care about what the people need in North Carolina: public schools, education, healthcare, all the great things we've talked about. But instead, they turn towards gerrymandering, voter suppression, restricting folks' access to the ballot in any and every way that they can. So I want folks to stay vigilant, stay alert, because we've got legislation pending right now in the North Carolina General Assembly, like you've seen in Georgia and other states, focused on suppressing your voice at the end of the day. So stay vigilant, stay alert, and stay engaged.
I don't know. At this point, I'm going to go to our question and answer session. For those who have not engaged, for panelists who have not engaged in the conversation, I think this is a good time for you all to dive right in. But I would ask, please, sir, if you would just keep your answers very limited to the question and give the Sunday school version of the answer. The more questions we can ask, the more ground we cover. The less you talk, the more ground we cover. But I do want to start with the senior of the group, Congressman Butterfield, for our first question, and then others can jump in as we get into this. But because of the miles on his engine, he has more experience of bridging and bringing people together. Congressman, one of the questions we have is, how do we bring a more cohesive message as Democrats between the various fractions that exist within our party?
I think the congressman is off.
He may be off. And so I'll ask if one of you want to take that question, particularly those who may not have had an opportunity to speak when we were going around the table earlier. How do we bridge the gap between those who consider themselves progressives and moderates and independent, conservatives, Democrats, all the different fractions that exist within the Democratic Party?
Yeah, so Antoine, let me jump in. This is Representative James Gilliard, and there's another issue I want to address, but let me jump in on this. I'm gonna preach this sermon, and that is, we have to message at the precinct level. And so it's one thing for the party, and the party is very good at bringing us content, but once content is brought in, it has to be brought into context. And what happens in rural communities versus urban communities, versus representatives who represent majority districts versus representatives who are 80% African-American districts, the context of that message is very different. And I think this is supposed to be a transparent conversation.
Absolutely.
We as a party have not figured that out. Republicans are, they're monoliths. It's white males, period, right? Privileged white males. They have a single message. They have one area of intensity. We are really the big tent party, and we have to learn to contextualize our messages. So what I would say to the people that are watching, take the messaging that is coming from the party and then figure out how it communicates at your local level. And here's the case: not your community, not your city, at a precinct level. Because within our races, messaging is different by precinct, especially in rural communities. And so I think the way we do this is we have to organize I'm gonna keep preaching this. We must organize at the precinct level, and that includes our messaging.
But I'm gonna throw this question to the group, and again, for those who did not speak earlier, please take the question. Suggest ways that we can encourage our local communities to be more engaged and being more involved. Where I'm from, my sharecropping grandmother would always say, Antoine, you on either going to be at the table or on the menu. You decide what that would look like. And so how can men of color in North Carolina be more engaged and involved politically, so they're not on the table, not on the menu and at the table?
Well, it goes, Antoine, this is Representative Raymond Smith. It goes back to something that Congressman Butterfield said in the very beginning. What we have to, and something that you said as well, we're dealing with issues that are all over the place. But what you said in the beginning was that 13% of African Americans, or 13% of men of color, voted for Trump. There's a reason for that. That was not by happenstance. The reason for that was because we have been left to feel disenfranchised. And so that's disenfranchisement is a result of years and years and years of Democrats being in power and nothing happening for the African American community or for communities of color. Well, what you saw was it was an economic issue. We're distracted easily by these issues like critical race theory. That's the non-conversation. That's a non-starter. If you don't have to be in a classroom to experience a racial event. So that's not the issue. The issue is economics. So when we start focusing on the issue of economics, that's how I feel we get the attention at the local level. When I explain to my constituents that the money that the federal government sends to our community and the money that the state government sends to our community, the determination on how that money is spent is made by those individuals who sit on city councils and county commissions and school boards. These local elections determine whether or not those funds reach our communities, the communities that are most in need. So at the end of the day, when we really stop focusing on letting them dictate the narrative about critical race theory, which again is a non-issue, they don't teach that in K-12, it's a graduate level conversation. So when we stop letting them distract us and dictate the narrative and focus in on our local communities, as my seatmate just said, we can then begin to get people interested in how this affects them.
Representative, I actually agree with you, but let me also say this. When I mentioned those numbers of 13% in 16 and the 20+% in 2020, one of the factors that doesn't go into that is the misinformation or the disinformation, as my mother would call it, lies that existed. You remember they were saying Hillary was the crime bill. She locked up black men, said the same thing about a lot of things. And so how do we push back, again, for someone who has not participated, how do we push back on the lies that get put out into the ecosystem by Republicans that have convinced men of color to not vote in their best interest? And I'll take it from anyone who has not spoken just yet.
Well, Antoine.
I want to speak on that. This is Abe. Three things I noticed. The Republicans have, in my opinion, the worst policies, but the best communication, because they're willing to lie or do whatever necessary to simplify. We have the best policies and the poorest communication. So we can't assume that people know. We said they're doing voter suppression. We have to break it down. What are they doing? They're cutting the early vote. They're changing the mail rules. They're making it so if your ballot doesn't arrive by 7:30 on election day, then they don't count it. We have to inform people now that this is going on and tell the preachers, sororities, fraternities, other people that we come in contact with, a campaign just like we did when they had dogs and so forth out to stop us from voting. This threat is even more serious because it's intellectual and it's information. So we have to focus on education. I think Congressman Butterfield mentioned that. I know Reverend Elliott knows that, and all of us at this conference here. But that's where my head is, how to inform about what they are doing specifically that hasn't existed before.
You know,
I want to also say that one of the things is that when it comes to these lies that we hear, that people parrot or they believe, or it casts doubts about what Democrats want to do, we also have to have those connections in the community so that when folks come to us or when we go to them and we try and refute those those lies or that misinformation, that people trust us. But that goes back to what Senator McKissick was saying. We cannot show up just days before an election and think that people are going to trust us. That is something that we have to do. And while it may look like African Americans and other people of color are not very representative in electoral government, what we know is that folks like myself and Commissioner Thomas, and when Representative Smith was a school board member, then Board of Education member Smith, there's so many of us serving in local government, and we also have to be articulating a vision here in our local communities, going back to what Representative Galliard said, because it is local. What we do matters. We control city councils, or we are very influential in city councils. That's who determines whether or not you're going to have affordable housing and the zoning rules, or how well your schools are funded, or so many other things. And no disrespect to our members of the General Assembly, but many local office holders and people at the local level have so much more impact on local communities. And we've also have to tell those stories of success in order for people to really trust us. And I think the other thing is that we talk a lot about what the Republicans are doing bad, but we've got to tell our own story. We have to tell what we want to do differently. And I don't think as Democrats, I know I say this as one of the vice chairs of the state party, but I don't think Democrats nationally have quite figured out how to articulate what we would do differently. And we've got to do that.
I know the vice chair of one of the county election board is on the call, and I would love for him to dive in. But one of the questions was, do we feel like North Carolinians are paying close enough attention to the voter suppression efforts being done in North Carolina? Look, I did both of Dan McCready's races when he ran for Congress. The first time there's no doubt in my mind, we won, but we all know the largest case of election fraud in modern day history happened right in North Carolina, and it happened right before our eyes, and no one was really paying attention. So the question came in is, are people paying enough attention? Not us on this call because we're engaged, but just everyday people. Junebug, them at the barbershop, Bobby at the car wash, and others. Are they paying attention to what the voter suppression strategies and tactics look like in 2021 going into 2022? If the vice chair is on, I'd love to hear from him or someone else who has not spoken.
Yes, Antoine, thank you so much. And I'm the vice chairman of the Hope County Board of Commissioners. Definitely good to see a lot of friends on this call. And to answer your question directly, no, I don't think a lot of people are even paying attention to some of the voter restrictions that these Republicans are trying to pass. I think what you said about Dan McCready was very evident, that Republicans don't care about stopping voter fraud. They care about stopping us from voting. You know, because they didn't work hard to try to stop, you know, what happened in that race, to try to ignore it. So thank you for bringing that up, Antoine. And just with my last 30 seconds, I'm here at a conference in DC. Representative Hawkins, I just saw Brenda Howerton and Namashima here. I told them you say hello. But I just want to say, barbershop talk, a lot of Black men, they don't see the difference between Republicans or Democrats. They don't see a difference. They don't feel a difference when someone's in charge. So my question is, instead of us trying to teach, are we listening? You know, do we listen to what these individuals who we want to vote, do we listen to what they want? You know, is our mechanism to take what they want and bring it back to the party? Or is it our mechanism and our will to push what the party wants to do and tell them this is what we're going to do or else? You know, so I would love to see, you know, some action when it comes to listening to what people want, because when they see 50 Cent standing beside the president, when they see Kanye West standing beside President Trump, that speaks a whole lot louder than us trying to preach a party platform. You know, so I think it's time for us to listen.
You know, I oftentimes say the closer your government is to you, the more important it is for you. I know we talk about local government and the impact, but a lot of people, according to this question that came in, this is not the gospel according to Antoine, this is from your fellow North Carolinians. According to the question that came in, local governments are not benefiting, or people are not benefiting from their representation that they have in North Carolina. So how do we hold folks accountable for those we put into office, in particular Democrats? And I'll let someone who has not spoken, who's on the panel, dive in, and anyone else wants to follow up, just try to keep your answer very focused so we can get through these questions.
Well, let me let me say this. I've heard city government doing a lot here. And I think that's part of the problem is it's very much local because, you know, as we circle back to men of color and how is it that, you know, the Democratic Party can't work for us, right? You know, let's focus on criminal justice, for example. You know, some of these, you know, and it's all over the place, but some of the most egregious actions being taken place are in Democratic cities. Let's be real about it. Barbershop talk, right? Some of the most egregious actions are being taken in Democratic cities, but yet we're trying to preach a message of vote Democratic Party. So, you know, regular Joe Schmo, he's looking at his man getting beat up in a Democratic city. It's like, yo, why am I going to vote Democrat? All right. Also, too, some of the programs don't necessarily cater to us, where, you know, some of us don't care to go to college. Okay, some of us really, you know, would like to go to a trade or go to two university, you know, work with our hands. And in some of our cities and local towns, what have you, these community colleges don't offer up the programs to where, you know, a young man graduates from high school and he has nowhere to go. So, you know, it's one thing to say, hey, vote Democrat because voter restriction, the Republicans do it X, Y, Z, but also have those things in place to make it so that, you know, men graduating from high school, or, you know, young men graduating from high school, or just men in general, feel like the Democratic Party is actually giving something back. So, you know, I you know, as I say here and heard, you know, city government doing a lot. It's, you know, it's sometimes local government that's doing it, local Democratic government.
Sure. For one of my General Assembly friends who has not spoken just yet, North Carolina General Assembly is so important and so critical, long and short term. Talk about HBCU support, because one of the things we know, when we're educated, we grow. When we're not educated and when HBCUs does not have the support they need, our communities do not grow. So talk about what you all are doing from the General Assembly perspective to make sure North Carolina HBCUs are strengthened. I know what this White House has done, over $1 billion in loan forgiveness for HBCUs. In fact, the president did a wonderful video and laid it out to the AME Church here at our quadricentennial celebration. But talk about what y'all are doing locally to do something about HBCU support.
Well, I'll jump in on that one, Antoine. As you well know, I'm a triple HBCU grad, so I'm all about HBCU education. And for me, my time in the General Assembly has been spent working on equitable funding for HBCUs. The issue is not whether or not we have the money. The issue is how are we going to allocate the money, and it's a numbers thing. We have placed bills on the calendar to be reviewed regarding HBCU funding. Graduate programs, PhD programs at some of our graduate institutions. We have 2 land grant colleges here in the state of North Carolina, NC State and North Carolina A&T. The funding is terribly inequitable for these 2 colleges, and they have the same mission. So we put money in for equitable funding on both of these. But again, it's a numbers game. And until we can get the numbers in the General Assembly to make the funding go where it needs to go, until we can get the interest, we get promises all the time. But the funding is based upon how you get this into the budget. And the budget numbers are in the favor of the Republican Party right now because they dictate pretty much the narrative. Now we can negotiate, and one of the realities that happens with us as well, we can negotiate pretty much anything we want to into the budget, but when it goes to what is called conference, it can disappear and there's nothing can be done or said about it. And so we have to put more pressure on our governor. We have to put more pressure on our constituents across the state to stay in the game. And we have to, we cannot back down from this conversation about HBCU funding. I put out a bill last year and had an amendment to move some money from one school to a HBCU. And the amendment actually almost passed. But believe me, I had some Democrats that voted against my amendment because they felt I was taking money away from their alma mater. We've got to have a real serious conversation about this as Democrats and as individuals who want North Carolina to be better.
You know,
Right.
you
You will judge us by that.
oftentimes say you cannot govern if you do not win. And losers don't legislate, as y'all know, and we know in South Carolina too, and a lot of other general assemblies across the country. Losers do not legislate, and you cannot govern if you do not win. So I hope and pray that you all will get it right in 2022 and close that gap. I want to turn to what I believe to be perhaps the issue of today. Black and brown boys and girls are 3 to 4 times more likely to be killed at the hands of law enforcement than any other constituency. We are 4 to 5 times more likely to be mishandled. My Southern bones digest that as treated like a second-class citizen at the hands of law enforcement than any other constituencies. I could talk about how our sentences are much higher than any other constituency in the country. So we oftentimes turn to Washington, D.C. for our fixes. And while, yes, we had the majority, but we see things seem to be clogged up in D.C., dysfunctional city. So what can the North Carolina local and state level do to reform our criminal justice and our police system so that we're not planning the funeral of another black boy, brown boy, black girl, brown girl? I'll let any one of y'all take it. I'd love to hear from someone who has not spoken so I don't get in trouble for not calling on people.
I'll jump on that at the appropriate time if anybody has.
I want to speak to it.
Same for me.
If I can, Antoine, Representative Gallagher and I both served on the governor's task force for racial equity and criminal justice. And I'll tell you, since the murder of George Floyd back in the summer, this has been a critical issue that we've been looking at in our state. For me, I'll tell you, I'm sick and tired of hearing, I can't breathe, I'm about to die, please don't kill me. And it's sad to say that so many black and brown folks across North Carolina, across this country, especially now with the recent murder of Andrew Brown Jr., they've had to pay that unpleasant price of being black or brown in our country with their life. So I will tell you, justice reform has been one of the places where we have been able to make progress in the North Carolina Senate. We've got some pending bills in the North Carolina House, and I know you guys have done some good work there as well. But for me, I don't believe we've been able to go far enough. And this is what I'll tell you, like you just talked about, losers don't get to legislate, but it's because of the folks that are on this call today, because of the folks that I'm joined on, because of their belief in our state's well-being, belief in our equity and justice. And in 2018, we did break that Republican supermajority. And we've been able to stop a lot of dangerous legislation. And we have been able to get a seat at the table to bring some sort of progress to justice reform. For example, North Carolina is the only state in our country that still prosecutes children as young as 6. Well, my bill, Senate Bill 207, passed the North Carolina Senate unanimously. We bumped that age up to 10, which is still a joke. Majority of states are towards 12. And obviously, we need to plan for kids being in our classrooms instead of preparing them for jail cells and ending that school to prison pipeline. So the sad reality is, Antoine, progress is bit by bit, incremental progress in our state assembly when it comes to justice reforms. But at the same time, we've been able to stop a lot of dangerous bills because we have unlocked the Governor Cooper's veto. I know Representative Gallagher can hopefully chime in on more, but I just want the folks to know that are on this call, that we see you and we hear you. And as long as I'm in the North Carolina General Assembly, we're going to continue to advance genuine justice reform for all people.
And I want to jump in there also. Thank you, Senator Mohammed, on that, because as a city councilman, there's only so much I can do in a Dillon's Rule state without having the legislature give us the authority, whether that is simple reforms that they do, or even allowing us to have, citizen review boards that can actually have some real power. But it also starts locally and who are serving on these city councils, because they do dictate to staff what kind of police department we want to have. And we have to look very deeply at why cities like Burlington, which is nearly 50% Black, has no people of color sitting on their city council. Or Roxborough, I'm looking at some stats right now. Roxborough is 59% people of color, but no person of color serving on their city council. And in order to change that, you have to change who is sitting on some of these town boards, some of these city boards. Spring Lake's great. Spring Lake, 100%. People of color are a majority, not 100% of the population, but 100% of the people who serve there are people of color. And to me, I think there is a clear line When we look at Ferguson, as it took place in 2014, majority Black city without a single person of color serving on their city council. And only recently, since then, have they had people of color elected to their city council and as mayor. It's very attractive to talk about who's going to be the president or these high level races like governor or US Senate, but who serves on your city council or your school board if you're talking about school to prison pipeline or other issues. It's very important, and our people have to take that to heart and get as involved in those elections as they do others. Because in some of these elections where it's a very small turnout, all it takes is a few more people and you will completely change the local governing body. And that's something I think we have to do, is dig down deep and start local to build up the systemic change.
One thing I want to add to it for the discussion is, just as Matt has just said, the police, if you think about it, are controlled from the local level, the city councils. That's where we just elected, we just got a new police chief in Raleigh, an African American female. That's good. Now we know where she's coming from, what she's gonna do. But the police have to be revised and reformed. We can't give up on the police. They're gonna be policing all of us. We need more people of color to become police officers and deputy sheriffs. We are down 15% in our capital city, in the sheriff's department and in the police department. When I say down 15%, I mean the vacancies. They are 85% instead of 100%, because with the attack on the police, broad scale, young people, who wants to be a cop if you're going to be vilified? So we need to seize that and say we need good cops, not no cops. And it's that simple. And we need that, because at that level, and we need more cops walking the beat, get out of the cars, get to know people, sectionalize the place so you know who Sergeant Smith is and Sergeant Jones and that kind of thing. That's what I think we need to do. We need to take that issue, and I'm on the Criminal Justice and Public Safety Committee. I'm trying to talk that up, and maybe I think even the Republicans would go for that because it's law enforcement. But we can't desert it. We have to engage it and make sure we are at the table.
Anybody else want to chime in on
Yeah,
that?
if I could just jump in real quick, Antoine, because there was something in Q&A around, I think it was Senate Bill 805 or one of the House bills around the protest bill. Let me encourage us to be very careful not to fall prey to the Republican agenda to get us to eat our own and to attack us. And it's very easy to be frustrated over a bill that got across the finish line, and yet there's no dialogue about the amazing legislation that got drafted and filed that the Republicans basically put in the trash can. And so the agenda here is to get us to pick off each other. And even though that's not a great bill, understand this: if Democrats were in the majority, that bill would have never been drafted and filed. And if it were drafted, it would certainly never been filed. And so we get very frustrated over legislation we don't agree with, not recognizing that it's only because we're in the minority. And so, Senator Muhammad and I have both filed on the House and the Senate omnibus bills on criminal justice reform to take on a bunch of the 125 recommendations of our criminal justice task force. But without being in the majority, there is not incentive on Republicans to be able to push forward that legislation. So instead of eating our own about legislation we don't like, do a little bit of a digging and start elevating the bills that are not being seen to recognize the significance of how it is that we have to vote together so we can take back the majority.
Antoine, if I may, real quick, I just want folks, because I saw some folks talking about incremental change and things of that nature. Look, at the end of the day, you heard Representative Galliard say, you heard Commissioner Hughes talk about, look, again, it's great to care about who's in the White House or who's in your federal offices, but all politics is local. All elections are local. Whether your kids are at your schools, your cities, your towns, who picks up your trash, your infrastructure in your city, and your state assembly when it comes to funding education, genuine justice reforms. I mean, I'll tell you, the North Carolina General Assembly essentially determines how you vote. Earlier I talked to you about these voter suppression bills. That's the North Carolina General Assembly determining how you vote, whether it's school board, county commission, city council, or president of the United States. So you need to pay close attention to your legislative assembly. Right now, in the North Carolina General Assembly, you'll have 50 state senators and 120 House of Representatives. And of course, you have a governor. So we've all got to work together to advance legislation. But the Republicans have been in control now for almost a decade. Earlier, I told you in 2018, we broke that Republican majority. So we'll be able to stop some dangerous bill. The Democrats have been able to increase our voice and have at least a seat at the table. But with going into 2022 and looking at redistricting, like you heard about Senator McKissick and Representative Hawkins talking about again, the Republicans are looking at a way to figure out how they can wield absolute power in our state for another decade. So if you care about public education, if you care about advancing bold, progressive, genuine justice reform, if you care about your water and air, heck, they won't expand Medicaid when the feds are essentially paying almost more than 90% of it because they hated that a black man was in the White House and he advanced the Affordable Care Act. They're literally letting folks in their rural districts die when hospitals are on the verge of collapse because of partisan politics. This is what's happening in North Carolina. And if 2022, we don't wake up, this is what we're going to look at for another decade. So I'm hoping folks stay vigilant in what's happening in our state legislative races, because we have a real opportunity to take the majority or at least hold the line, hopefully, going into 2024. Thank you.
When it comes to police brutality, I think we need to clarify what police brutality actually is. You know, we do a lot of talking as Democrats. We want to stop this and stop that. There was a shooting where a 16-year-old girl was shot, and the narrative was that she called the police because she was going to be jumped. And a video came out with her lunging at a young lady with a knife in her hand, and a police officer discharged his weapon. It was very clear on social media that people half and half thought the officer was justified, and the other half thought he wasn't. You know, so at some point we have to have a conversation on what is it that we want to stop. Of course, we want to stop unnecessary killings, but what is the definition of unnecessary? We need to get more specific, I think. We need to get more on the community level, have law enforcement officers that we trust to be able to help us with the conversation, like the one that just left Durham for Memphis. And we need to get down to the nitty gritty and stop going around in circles, talking, because nothing's been done. You know, if we have all these discussions and all these marches, the George Floyd funeral in North Carolina was in my home county. But if we're just marching and we're not seeing any results, then we're just wasting our breath. And if we want to know why a lot of Black men don't vote, it's because of that. It's because they see us as antics who do a lot of talking, taking pictures, wanting to get your votes. But at the end of the day, when we're in power, which the Democrats have been in power for 100 years in this state, we forget about that. You know, Rodney King and a lot of police brutality was taking place at that time. They asked, what did we do then? You know, so I want to get real with it. And I'll just end with that before I get too passionate on that piece.
Well,
And if I
thank you.
could just chime in very,
Thank
very
you, sir.
quickly on this. I think the thing we have to do in terms of law enforcement, first, those people who are police chiefs, those people who are sheriffs, they need to be held accountable for what goes on within their departments. If you talk to officers, if you talk to those leaders, what you find is that leadership comes from the top. So, I mean, if you have those head of those law enforcement agencies that are acting responsibly, that make certain that they understand what de-escalation training is about. I mean, there are people who understand what it means to go in there, and when a person is getting stopped and it looks as if it's getting ready to escalate to the next level and somebody could end up getting shot, they know how to de-escalate it from the very beginning. And they use strategies to de-escalate. They understand implicit bias, so that when the Black kid is the one that goes for his glove box in the car, you don't think he's going for a gun as opposed to going to get out his registration. I mean, all of those things have to be done, and training is essential. And that training needs to come from the top down. And if you have your sheriffs, if you have your chiefs of police that are actually carrying out those policies, it's critical. And if we get that also built into our basic law enforcement curriculum that's out there, and if we get these departments all across our state literally certified to the right standards, a lot of departments do not have certifications. And when they do have certifications, it's to fairly low standards. And sometimes they can't afford to because they're small departments. But there's a lot to be done in this area. I think a lot of progress is being made. Is it enough? Absolutely not. I mean, I think the thing that we need to be aware of is that the thing that makes us aware today of what's going on more so today than it would have a decade or two ago is the cell phone and the ability to use that cell phone and that camera to capture the images of what's transpiring so that it's no longer debatable what the officer did. If it hadn't been for the cell phone video, I think we might still be debating what happened with George Floyd, but we don't have to worry about it anymore. We saw it all. So, I mean, what we can do is get people better prepared. We need to get the officers better trained, and we need to hold folks accountable and get the basic law enforcement training in place. And I believe that in Washington, they ought to have national standards for this and provide the resources for the national standards. So you don't have all these various levels of law enforcement agencies, some of which are equipped to do things right, some of which are completely ill-equipped, and some of which, wouldn't even know where to start. And yes, our city councils can be very involved, and county commissioners can be involved in holding sheriffs responsible, and likewise holding our chief of police responsible.
And I think
I just want to mention this also. It's the little things, right? I live in a predominantly Hispanic part of town, right? And from what I've noticed my years living here, that if not maybe a majority of the checkpoints are in the Hispanic community here where I live. Those are, little small things. Going back to the whole thing, right? Chop it up. So we're just gonna keep it, say things as it is, right? Again, how to get men of color to buy into the Democratic Party and so forth. We trust police officers with doing so much things, but at the same time, we need to also, we cannot have them go into a scene and be like, a mental health. We need more mental health workers. We need more, more folks who are trained where, if they go to the scene, there's obviously a mental health crisis, that the police officer should not go onto the scene and, and approach that perhaps maybe a social worker, someone who's more familiar with those type of things to actually, handle that. But to have a police officer going to a scene and, that's, it can get messy. It can get messy. Those are just the little things where I think, we can get better.
Real quick, just along with sheriffs and police chiefs, like you heard Senator McKissick mention, I want folks to remember district attorneys have a tremendous amount of discretion in your local community. My DA is on this. I see him. He's joined the group. We got a fantastic DA in Mecklenburg County, but so many other parts of our state need great DAs. So you can influence criminal justice right in your own community, right there, by electing justice reform-minded DAs.
Well, and I will say that the DA in Pasquotank County, 4-year, I guess that would be 2018, is up for election next year. And when he said, hold me accountable at the ballot box, he only won his election by 600 votes. How many more people would it take, Black and brown folks showing up at the ballot box doing just what he asked people to do? Now, he did it in a very condescending and disrespectful way, but I think we need to rise to that occasion, rise to that challenge. And I'll personally raise money for whoever steps forward and wants to run for that seat, because that is what we're talking about. We're talking about a DA who decided not to prosecute something that I think most of us could recognize was an execution style killing of someone who should still be alive today.
Representative Zach Hawkins, obedience is better than sacrifice. And while I would love to sacrifice the rest of the evening to talk to y'all, I'm gonna be obedient to Shantae because I want to be able to come back and do more chop it ups with the good people of North Carolina. So I told Shantae we were gonna be coming around the mountain around 8 o'clock. It's a little after 8, so here we come. As we close out, in all seriousness, let me say this as we close out. My grandmother's grandfather started one of the first AME churches in the country. The church was burned down during the church burnings of that day. The church was rebuilt not too long after it was burned down. They named it after him. It's called the Butler Chapel AME Church. It's in Orangeburg, South Carolina, not far from the South Carolina State campus, South Carolina State University campus. But I'm told every time my grandmother's grandfather, Reverend Moses Butler Felder, got up to speak or preach, he would always say somebody's life is on the line, somebody's soul is at stake. In every single election in this country, for people who look like us on this Zoom call tonight, we have to take that same approach.
Right.
Somebody's life is on the line. Somebody's soul is at stake.
That's right.
And it is an increased urgency in everything we do. From those of you who are elected, you've got to conduct policy decisions as if somebody's life is on the line or somebody's soul is at stake. When you're having discussions and debate, it's not about you. It's not even about your district. It's not even about the next office you're thinking about running for. Thinking about today, the fact that somebody's life is on the line, somebody's soul is at stake. And so while this conversation is good, and I so appreciate everybody who was involved putting it together, my challenge to everybody on the Zoom is you go do one of these where you live, in your district, all across your district. If you're elected, go do it all across your district. You don't have to have a buffet of elected officials or key leaders to do it. You can get the boys off the street corner. In fact, they're probably going to bring more people together than any elected official will. Go get the boys at the car wash. Go get the boys at the barbershop. Go get the ladies in the beauty salon. Believe it or not, women can help men move the needle too, because we all respect the women in our lives. We've got to make these things transferable. The people we need to reach, unfortunately, they probably do not have internet access because at some point in time, somebody's failed to not give them broadband access. And so these Zooms are good for now, but we've got to take these conversations to the people if we want to reach the people. So my challenge to the good people of North Carolina, who are on this panel in particular, is let's take it to the people. Let's take it to the streets. If we take it to the people and we take it to the streets, I guarantee the people will come to us and we will control the streets. And that's how we change the trajectory of this country. And finally, before I close, behind every strong man of color, there's a tired woman of color. Shantae, my friend, I thank you so much for everything you're doing up in North Carolina and for inviting me to be a part of. I feel like North Carolina is my second home, and I so appreciate it. Look, I will make myself available to come to North Carolina on my own dime, to wherever you guys are, to help facilitate a conversation, put together a conversation, whatever it is we need to do, because this work is just that important, not just to me, not just to North Carolina, to the country. When I say so goes North Carolina, so goes the country, I really mean that about 2022, and you all know that. So with that, Shantae, I'll turn it back over to you, and I will govern myself accordingly.
Well, you know that I will actually push you to work, so I'm gonna hold you to that. Representative Hawkins, I know you have something to share with us.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this is the Chop It Up kickoff. So hopefully everyone enjoyed this. You will see these faces that you heard from, these amazing elected officials that you heard from in your communities across North Carolina. This was just the first one. And so as Antoine said, we have to operate like someone's soul is at stake, because the soul of North Carolina is at stake. And our way of working to reach everyone is to make sure that we keep these conversations going. So this was our kickoff, but on July 15th, we are going to work the Sand Hills region, which is sort of the Cumberland County, Fayetteville area. On the 22nd, we're going to look at the Triangle, the Greater Triangle area, to pull those brothers together to have a conversation about ways in which we can change communities. After that, we're going to look at the Triad, and then of course we're going to go to the great state of Mecklenburg to have this conversation, because just as Antoine said, the aim here is to pass it off to a Raymond, to a James, to a Matt, to an Allen, to a Senator Muhammad, and allow them to have these detailed conversations when they get into their communities. It doesn't matter where it is. It can be the barbershop, it can be the street corner. We just want people to come together and feel like the Democratic Party is reaching out in an authentic way so that we can hear what people's concerns are and that we know them as we're going towards the ballot box. It's about authentic action, as all of these brothers have said tonight. We have to show and prove for brothers of all races and all creeds and all colors to be with us. And so I can't thank you enough. This has exceeded my wildest expectations tonight, but I didn't know I had the right people on the bus. So thank you, brothers, for participating on this panel. Thank you, Antoine, for crossing the border. You can always move to North Carolina, my brother. And we will see you across the state. So thank you so much. Have an incredible night. And thank you for joining Chop It Up.
Thanks, guys. Y'all take care.
Bye. I will make one more comment. I know a couple of people put in the chat that they were concerned that we didn't have dates for their area. We're going to start out with the dates that we provided, but we will be in your area soon as well.
That's right. We will be in your area. Don't you worry. And if you want us to come to your area, please send us an email based on the registration, and we'll make sure to set one up and give you a date. All right. Take care.